Let's say you just paid a contractor to spray foam your attic. The crew showed up, they sealed everything tight, and now you got what it looks like the smartest upgrade on the block. Lower energy bills, no drafts, a clean, modern, airtight house. You feel like you finally did something right. You feel like you're ahead of the game. And that feeling is exactly what makes this so dangerous. 'Cause here's what nobody told you before they sprayed. That sealed attic, that tight wall cavity, and that premium install, it may have just made your house harder to inspect, harder to repair, and in some cases harder to sell. Not because spray foam is automatically a disaster, but because of what happens when the promises layered around it don't match what's actually occurring inside your walls, behind your ceilings, and under your roof deck, where no one is looking anymore. This isn't a story about one bad contractor who cut corners on a Friday afternoon. It's much bigger than that. And if you're considering spray foam, or you've already had it installed, you need to hear all of it. The pitch is nearly irresistible. Spray foam insulation, especially closed cell, gets sold as the apex of modern home performance. It air seals and insulates in a single step. It adds structural rigidity to the assembly, keeps the outside world out and your conditioned air in. You'll hear language like vapor barrier, thermal envelope, and an energy efficiency dropped into the conversation like they're guarantees rather than targets. Builders love recommending it. Contractors upsell it as a premium option. Energy auditors point to it. Rebate programs exist specifically to make it feel like the obvious responsible choice. The marketing is clean, confident, and coming from every direction at once. And part of the pitch is real. In the right assembly, installed correctly under the right conditions, by a crew that knows exactly what they're doing, spray foam can perform the way the brochure describes. That's not the argument here. The argument is everything hiding underneath that phrase, when done right, and why those three words are where ordinary homeowners keep getting buried. Here's where the first crack appears, and it's a big one. Spray foam, especially closed cell, is essentially permanent. Once it goes in, it does not come out without a serious fight. And once it seals a surface, that surface stops behaving the way it used to. Your roof deck, your wall framing, the cavities that make up the skeleton of your house, they no longer have the same capacity to dry out when moisture finds its way in. And moisture always finds a way in, not because your house is poorly built, because that's simply what moisture does. It moves, it migrates, it gets in through imperfections you didn't know existed, and ones that develop over time as the house settles and shifts. In a traditionally vented attic, if moisture works its way into the roof sheathing, the assembly recovers. Air moves through, humidity dissipates, the wood dries out before damage has a chance to compound. It's not a perfect system, but it has forgiveness built into it. The moment you coat that roof deck in closed cell foam, you've eliminated most of that forgiveness. Moisture that enters now has dramatically reduced options for escape, and wood that cannot dry out rots, slowly, silently, behind a sealed surface that looks completely fine from the inside. For years before anyone notices anything wrong, you won't smell it in year one. You won't see it. Your energy bills might actually be lower. Everything appears to be working exactly as advertised. That's the part that should genuinely concern you, because hidden damage that feels fine on the surface is always the most expensive kind. And understand, this isn't even the worst case scenario. This is what can happen when a technically acceptable install runs into the wrong moisture conditions over time. Now let's talk about what a bad install actually looks like, because this is where things get significantly worse. Spray foam is a two-component chemical system. When those components come together at the right ratio, at the right temperature, on the right substrate, you get foam that cures properly, adheres solidly, and performs the way it was designed to. When something in that equation is off, such as when the temperature is too cold, when the substrate has surface moisture, when the proportioning equipment has not been calibrated recently, or when the crew is moving faster than the chemistry allows, you can end up with foam that looks completely uniform on the surface and is fundamentally compromised underneath. off ratio. Foam can shrink after it cures. It can pull away from the framing and sheathing it was supposed to bond to, leaving gaps and voids that completely defeat the purpose of the install. It can cure with a soft, tacky texture in places that are now buried under drywall, roofing materials, or finished surfaces. And in some situations, bad foam releases a persistent chemical odor, not something faint that fades in a week. A smell that moves through the house, that does not respond to ventilation, that has forced homeowners out of their own properties while they try to figure out who is responsible and what recourse they actually have. Here's the part that doesn't get said clearly enough. A bad install and a good install can look identical to you when the crew walks out the door. The surface looks uniform. The coverage appears complete. You have no way to see the pull-away gaps forming behind the sheathing or the soft pockets inside a wall cavity. You have no instrument in your hand that confirms whether the mix ratio was within specification that day. You paid a premium price, you got what appears to be premium work, and you may not find out what you actually received until something forces the issue. And by that point, the foam has been sealed behind a finished ceiling for 2, 3, or 5 years. Now step back further, because the real trap is not just about the product itself. Think about the pressure behind the decision. Manufacturers invest heavily in marketing spray foam as a premium, modern, responsible choice. Builders receive incentives for specifying it. Energy efficiency programs and utility rebates actively encourage it. Code language gets quoted in ways that make homeowners believe that meeting code is the same as guaranteeing performance. Everyone in the chain, from the manufacturer to the installer, has a financial reason to move towards spray foam, and almost none of them are present when the moisture problem surfaces 4 years later, or the smell starts coming through the walls. This is not a fringe product sold by shady operators out of an unmarked van. This is a mainstream, widely recommended, aggressively marketed material going into hundreds of thousands of homes every year. The risk doesn't spread evenly across that system. It concentrates at the bottom, and the homeowner who cannot verify the mix ratio, cannot inspect the cavity after the finished surfaces go up, and cannot compel anyone to acknowledge a problem once the foam is locked permanently inside the assembly. Experienced roofers know what this looks like. Inspectors who have been doing this long enough recognize the pattern when they pull back a section and find sheathing that should have stayed dry and didn't. Remediation crews encounter it at the end of the line, after the rot has had years to spread past the original failure point, after the damage has moved into framing that was never supposed to be touched. They're not surprised. This is a pattern they see, not an anomaly. The homeowner is always the last one to find out, and when they do find out, they need access. Maybe there's a roof leak and the source can't be traced from above. Maybe there's an electrical issue in a wall. Maybe a plumber needs to reach a pipe that runs through a foamed cavity. In a house with traditional insulation, this is manageable. Pull back some bats, do the work, put them back. In a house where spray foam has been applied to roof decking, wall framing, or over mechanical systems, mechanical removal is the only path. That means specialized labor, real disruption, potential damage to the surfaces the foam is bonded to, and a job that is categorically more invasive and more expensive than it would have been before the upgrade. You didn't just buy insulation. You changed how accessible your entire house is. You bought dependency on specialists for work that used to be straightforward. Now here's the pushback, because it always comes up. People will say spray foam is exceptional when installed correctly. They'll say building science is complex and climate dependent. They'll point to thousands of homes performing beautifully with it. And all of that is technically accurate. None of it is wrong. But when done right is precisely where homeowners get trapped. And here's why that defense doesn't actually protect you. Most homeowners are not building scientists. They cannot read a thermal scan. They cannot test a chemical mix ratio on a job site. They cannot assess whether the substrate temperature was within acceptable range before the crew started spraying. They are trusting a contractor they found through a referral or an online search, operating in a market where the incentive structure favors moving fast, finishing the job, and getting to the next one. The standard of done right is documented in manufacturer specifications and appears in sales presentations. The homeowner standing in their newly foamed attic has no practical, accessible way to verify whether that standard was actually met, and they may not find out for years. So the real question is never just whether spray foam can perform correctly. The question is whether you, in your specific house, with the specific crew that showed up, on that specific day, under the specific conditions that existed, actually received what you paid for. That answer may not arrive until the damage is already compounding behind a surface you cannot see. There is one more dimension to this that tends to hit people hardest, and it's the one that comes at the worst possible time: resale. Buyers today are increasingly aware of spray foam issues in ways they weren't even 5 or 6 years ago. Home inspectors are flagging unvented attic assemblies more regularly. Some buyers' agents are specifically trained to ask about foam installs. Lenders and insurers in certain markets have started requesting documentation. The premium upgrade that felt like a clear asset when you paid for it can become a negotiation item, a concern in an inspection report, or a reason a cautious buyer decides to walk. You may find yourself needing to explain the assembly, produce documentation from the original installer, or reduce your asking price to account for uncertainty that a buyer's inspector cannot resolve by looking at a finished surface. The upgrade you paid extra for might become a liability. It could go at exactly the moment you need the sale to work. And this is the broader truth that matters most. Spray foam is not the only product that follows this pattern. It is simply the most visible and the most instructive current example of something that keeps repeating in the modern housing market. Premium sealed solutions. Materials that perform in the right hands and create hidden, delayed, expensive problems in the wrong ones. Upgrades that promise efficiency and protection while quietly reducing a homeowner's ability to see, monitor, access, and understand what is happening inside their own house. Every time a home becomes more sealed, more opaque, harder to open up and inspect and repair, the homeowner loses a degree of control over their own asset. The house becomes something that requires specialists to interpret. Problems become harder to catch early because there is no early visibility. And when something finally goes wrong, the diagnosis is harder, the access is more destructive, and the repair is more expensive than it had any reason to be. That is the real story here. Not that spray foam is universally dangerous, but that the gap between what it promises and what an average homeowner can actually verify is wide enough that real problems move through it regularly, quietly, and expensively. Sealed is not the same as safe. Premium is not the same as verified. And a house you cannot see inside of is a house where the next expensive surprise is already waiting for the right moisture conditions, the right temperature cycle, the right moment for a problem that was always there to finally become impossible to ignore. Ask hard questions before anyone picks up a spray gun. Understand what you are actually committing to when you choose a permanent, sealed, specialist-dependent assembly. Understand that some decisions look like smart upgrades going in and behave like traps on the way out. And know, more than anything else, that the most expensive problems in any house are always the ones that were invisible the longest. Most homeowners never question the upgrade. That's the part of this nobody talks about openly. You get a quote, you get a recommendation, you get a number that feels high but justified, and somewhere in the back of your mind you think this is the smart choice. Everyone says so. The contractor says so. The energy auditor says so. The rebate program practically says so by existing. And so you sign off, the crew shows up, and 2 days later you have a sealed house and a lighter bank account and a feeling that you just made a genuinely good decision. That feeling can last for years. Sometimes it lasts until the house goes on the market. Sometimes it lasts until the roof leaks and nobody can figure out where the water's coming from. Sometimes it lasts until a smell starts and doesn't stop, and the contractor who installed it stopped returning calls 6 months after the job was done. The problem with spray foam is not that it fails dramatically. Dramatic failures are easy. You see them, you respond, you fix them. The problem with spray foam is that when it goes wrong, it tends to go wrong slowly, invisibly, and in places specifically designed to be inaccessible after the work is finished. Think about what it means to seal a roof deck from the inside. You are making a permanent decision about how that assembly will manage moisture for the entire remaining life of the roof. Not for this winter, not until you refinance. Permanently. And if the foam was mixed slightly off, if the temperature that morning was lower than the manufacturer's specification, if there was any surface moisture on the sheathing when the crew started, the assembly you just committed to permanently is already compromised. And it looks exactly the same as one that isn't. This is where people get frustrated when they hear this, because the natural response is, well, hire a good contractor, do your research, get references, and that advice is not wrong. But it also does not solve the core problem, which is that even a well-reviewed contractor with legitimate certifications is operating in a system where the homeowner has almost no ability to verify the work independently after it is done. You can look at the surface. You can see that it appears uniform. You cannot see the pull-away gaps forming behind the sheathing. You cannot detect the shrinkage that happens when off-ratio foam cures and contracts slightly away from the framing it was supposed to permanently bond to. Those gaps are not theoretical, they show up in remediation jobs. They show up when roofers pull back materials and find that the airtight seal that was supposed to protect the deck has a series of pathways where AIR and moisture have been moving freely for years. The homeowner paid for an airtight assembly. They got something that looked airtight from the only angle they were ever allowed to see. And here is the thing about moisture getting into a sealed assembly with no drying pathway. It doesn't announce itself. There's no alarm. There's no water stain in year 1 or year 2. The wood absorbs what it can. Conditions fluctuate seasonally. The damage builds gradually. And at some point, 3 years in, 5 years in, sometimes longer, something becomes visible. A soft spot, a stain, a smell from an area that shouldn't have any smell. By that point, the damage is not in its early stage. By that point, it has been compounding in the dark for years, and the repair is not a simple fix. It's a project. An expensive, invasive, specialist-required project that involves removing foam that was specifically designed not to be removed. Nobody tells you that part at the sales consultation. What they tell you is R value. They tell you air changes per hour. They tell you projected energy savings and payback period, and how this is the same system used in commercial construction and high-performance homes. All of that is real information. None of it is false. But it is information selected for the purpose of making a sale, not for the purpose of making sure you understand every dimension of what you are committing to inside your own house. The incentive structure in this market does not reward full disclosure. The manufacturer wants the product specified. The installer wants the job. The builder wants the rebate and the energy rating. The energy consultant wants to recommend the highest performing option. Every person in that chain benefits from the sale happening. Not one of them is accountable for what occurs inside your wall cavity in year 4. You are the only person in that transaction who lives with the long-term outcome. And you are the least equipped person in that transaction to evaluate at the point of decision. That asymmetry is the real problem, not spray foam specifically. The asymmetry, the gap between what gets communicated clearly and what gets discovered quietly later by the homeowner who trusted a system that was never fully designed around their long-term interest, and extends past installation. Think about what happens to a house that has been heavily foamed when it comes time to sell. A buyer's inspector walks in. They see foam on the roof deck, they flag it. Not necessarily because anything is wrong, but because they cannot verify that nothing is wrong. They cannot see behind it. They cannot assess the condition of the sheathing. They cannot confirm the install was done correctly. All they can do is note it, flag it, and let the buyer decide how much uncertainty they're comfortable purchasing. Some buyers walk. Some buyers negotiate hard. Some buyers request documentation from the original installer, documentation that may or may not exist, from a company that may or may not still be in business. The premium upgrade that was supposed to make your house more valuable has introduced a layer of unverifiable uncertainty that follows the property forward in time. This is not an edge case, this is a pattern. And it keeps repeating because the people who experience it are at the end of the chain. After all the decisions have been made, after all the money has changed hands, after the foam has cured and the surfaces have been finished and the crew has moved on to the next job. The house that looks sealed and protected and efficient from the outside may be a house where the clock is already running, where moisture is already doing what moisture does in assemblies that cannot dry, where the gap between the promise and the reality is getting wider every season, invisibly, quietly, in the dark behind a surface that was specifically designed to stay that way. Sealed is a finish line in the sales conversation. In the real world, it's a starting point for a set of conditions your house now has to live with permanently. Make sure you understand those conditions before the spray gun ever comes out, because once it does, that decision belongs to you. All of it. For as long as you own that house, and possibly beyond,